Okay, so for those of you who have just joined us, this is Anna Freud's fourth national conference on family hubs, and we'll be focusing on relational practice today. My name's Claudia Cousins, and I'm the Deputy Head of the Early Years and Prevention Department, where we host the National Centre for Family Hubs. We're funded by the Department for Education, who will be closing the conference this afternoon, so we're looking forward to hearing from them. Thank you to everyone joining us today, and particularly to Brandon and Rob, who are our amazing BSL interpreters. By clicking on the interpretation button, you can turn the BSL view on or off. And thank you also to those who are meant to be joining us in person in Manchester. Although we had to move the conference online, we will still have a focus on Manchester later on, when we hear from Rakshana Ahmed, who is the head teacher from Longsight Primary School and Family Hub in Manchester. She's our second keynote speaker and will be talking to us about Longsight's Family Hub journey, which is rooted in their local community and uses relational practice to provide a holistic and preventative support offer to families. We also have a variety of speakers from practice backgrounds in local authorities, as well as interactive workshops facilitated by our regional and participation team. This morning's session will be in a webinar format, so all attendee microphones and cameras are turned off. If you would like to submit a question to speakers, please pop this in the Q&A function. Our support team will be monitoring the Q&A, so if you have any technical questions, let us know, and closed captions will be enabled for the duration of this webinar. All webinar sessions today will be recorded for the Anna Freud YouTube channel, and the workshop sessions will be recorded for internal use only. Where we have permission from speakers, we'll share the presentation slides after the event. So I'd like to welcome now our CEO, Professor Peter Fonagy, who is going to introduce the topic of relational practice.
Hi, and good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here, Claudia. It's one of the most important things that the Centre does. I really deeply believe in your program and project of work, that it will make a difference, it will make a change in the way children and young people are supported and their families are supported in a one-stop shop, in a single organization, a single hub within wherever region they live. I'm just absolutely thrilled. And thank you so much for inviting me to start this off, because relational practice is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. I do, again, deeply believe in it, and I think it's a great thing. And I'll just say a few words about it from my point of view, but I'll grind to a painful halt, and then happy to answer your questions about it, or indeed if there are any others. But relational practice has at least 6 separate elements. The first one, and perhaps the most important one to my way of thinking, is it being non-stigmatizing, it being individualized, and through both those facets, it being compassionate. So regardless of what an individual presents with, it is the starting point is kindness. And that can make, I believe, all the difference to what happens subsequently. Then the second aspect is being trauma-informed. What does trauma-informed is a phrase that's often used, and people are more or less clear about what they mean. But I think the most important aspect of being trauma-informed is that you can tell in an individual's responses to you what is a consequence of severe adversities that they had experienced, and what is them that really needs to be separated from them. Because so often we ask people, but what's the matter with you, rather than what has happened to you, what has happened with you. To me, trauma-informed is the inquiry about the latter, what has happened. Then thirdly, and perhaps linked to it, is being collaborative, being holistic, as regarding individuals in the context of where they live, who they are, who they link to, and coming not with a single need. Very few, in my experience clinically, almost no one has a simple or a single need. We can highlight one, but I think the important thing is to work with the person as a person, as an individual, as a whole. And as a consequence of that, recognize that they have a whole number of needs that interact. Some are social, some are psychological, some are family, some are demographic, a range of things. And we need to take them in combination, in collaboration with them, accepting that they are trying to cope with it exactly as we would try and cope with the range of difficulties that we face. And then that maybe signals the next point, which is to me is a very important one, which is to do with the style of our work. We need to promote an attitude of flexibility and continuity of care, because people's problems do not stay the same. They change. They come with one thing and then it moves on to something else, and we have to move with it. Being able to move with the changing nature of someone's needs who's coming to us for help or support is being kind, is being compassionate, is being recognized, is recognizing that they come as a person together with a whole host of issues, and we need to adjust to that. But we can't do that on our own. If the next point is really about us working with others, because problems are multifaceted, we need to find other people that will help us with different aspects of the difficulties that individuals come with. And that's part of relational practice. So relating is not just the people that come to us, but also relating to others who, like us, work with the system, work within the system, and sometimes support the same family in a different context. So joint working is really important. And then finally, let me jump on a bit of a hobby horse. I think practice-based evidence is really, really important. Monitoring how well we do is, to me, a key aspect of relational practice. It's a key aspect for two reasons. One is, I think, because we do not learn unless we actually collect information that we can learn from. We need to make our organizations learning organizations. And being a learning organization means collecting information from the people who we support, the people who we serve. And secondly, it empowers us to change, because obviously we want to support people and we want to support the people that we work with to flourish, to change. But actually, if we just focus on them, we are missing a trick. We also really need, in relational practice, to think about ourselves, to think about our own well-being, but also our own needs to move, to change, to to improve, to find better ways of delivering the service that we feel are so important. So these are just 6 points that I wanted to raise, Claudia, before a day that looks from the programme to be just massively, massively interesting.
Thanks so much, Peter. And it's really interesting and I think helpful for our audience to hear about relational practice on an individual level with their wider teams and with families. And I think particularly in the context of integration as well, many of our audience members will be thinking about relational practice in the context of integrated working. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about relational practice from a systemic perspective and what that means sort of through networks and systems for you.
Well, it's the same principles, Claudia, apply to systems as apply to individuals. You have to be in a listening mode. You have to recognize that people are seeing the same person from different perspectives, and you have to be compassionate with their points of view. You have to be also very aware that the elephant has many aspects, and that you only see one aspect of that elephant. And a proper systemic approach is recognizing that from different perspectives, that problem looks very different, and that family can present very differently. And then finally, I would say flexibility is the key. Moving, I feel, is the key within oneself as a practitioner. And that, I think, the joint working makes a dream possible, which is a dream of what I call and like to talk about as epistemic trust. Trust in the knowledge that others convey to us, because that's what human beings depend on. We are here to learn on this planet and to send that learning on to the next generation. And for that learning, we have to trust the person and the persons that we learn from. To the extent that systems can be trusting of each other, individuals, practitioners working within systems can trust what others say to them, can be compassionate, can be flexible, can be open. I think we achieve a better world that perhaps many of us were confronted with when we started this journey.
Thanks so much, Peter. And I think that's a really helpful note to end on, thinking about flexibility, trust and compassion. So I'm delighted to move on to our next speaker, who is Liz Cracknell, also from Anna Freud. Liz is a mental health nurse and systemic practitioner, and also is the joint program director for AMBIT at Anna Freud. So I'm really excited to hand over to Liz now.
Thanks so much, Claudia, and thank you for having me here. And that actually was a really super introduction, those last bits that Peter was saying to what I'm going to talk about. So I don't think I'm going to be telling people things they don't already know, but I'm just sort of trying a bit to kind of summarize to get us into thinking why are we talking all day about relational practice. So I'm going to be thinking about why relationships matter and which relationships matter when it comes to working with children and families, and also just going to briefly zoom into a particular aspect of kind of good relationships, which is trust, which is why it was lovely to hear Peter talking about that just then. So why are relationships important? Well, I was telling my a friend yesterday that I was going to be doing this talk, and it was possibly going to be the most self-centered talk that I've ever done, because I'm starting off with a picture of me. But so here's me, clearly very, very young. At this point, I've got a little mind in there, but it's really at the beginnings of development. And actually at this age, I don't even really know that I've got one. I don't know, you know, what it means to have a mind that is separate to somebody else's. But I start to learn about my own mind in terms of how my dad here kind of has a representation in his mind of my mind. I start to learn about myself and others through a relationship. So in a way, through relationships, we learn that we exist. We learn about ourselves and others and the world. And hopefully there's not just kind of one of these relationships going on. If we're fortunate, you know, maybe I've got, you know, another dad who is also kind of paying attention to my mind, and in the experience of that relationship too, I'm kind of learning about the world. I might have, and it's great if I do have other kind of people who are kind of paying attention to me in my mind and that I'm learning from, maybe grandma and granddad, an auntie, cousin. Hopefully as I get a bit older, I've got some friendships as well. And beyond kind of family and friends, I want to be increasingly connected into community relationships. So it's great if I'm hooked into a school where I'm recognised as an individual and valued, but I might not be. I might be in a school setting where I'm made to feel a little bit different, or I feel that I'm a bit invisible, that there's sort of kind of systemic discrimination going on. So the quality of the relationships that I have are, when I'm a child and also throughout my life course, are really, really important determinants of my social well-being, my mental well-being, and my physical well-being. So all of these relationships around me, kind of close peers, the community, have a big impact on how I am able to function. About half of us, sadly, in our childhoods will experience one or more adverse childhood experiences. Now, that doesn't mean that we'll go on necessarily to experience kind of longer term difficulties as a result of that. Some of us will, some of us won't. And clearly there's a number of other factors that kind of influence how impactful in the long term those adverse experiences are for us. A really, really key one is relationships. So there's really compelling evidence that having family, peer and community relationships act as a buffer against the negative effects of adversity. So if we take, you know, one child, sort of two children who've had a similar adverse experience, one is well connected into good relationships with their family, but also to kind of other community kind of relationships, and the other that isn't, the one that isn't is much more likely to go on to sort of develop problems as a result of that adversity. So our relationships are important in terms of our development and our well-being, particularly so if we experience adverse events, which, you know, at least kind of half of us will within our childhood. Now, sometimes, and despite the relationships around us, some of us will need some outside help as children, or as a family. We'll need perhaps some people from services to come in and help. And when they do, when we're getting help, we kind of need a good relationship with the helper. So I'm sure lots of people have heard of common factors theory, or it's also called the dodo theory, and I'll say why in a minute, which says that there are some common factors in different helping approaches, which are sort of the active ingredients. So often there's multiple helping approaches which are equally effective, and the idea is that that's down to them having some common features, and one of those core common features is about the relationship. So there's something about the quality of the relationship between the helper and the person receiving help that is a really key active ingredient. And the reason it's called the dodo theory is that, you know, in Alice in Wonderland there's the caucus race that the dodo kind of runs, and there's no finish line, and it's all very confusing, and at the end he just says all have won and all must have prizes. So this is the idea of actually all of these different psychosocial approaches have won, because they are often similarly effective, and that's because each of them kind of focus on the relationship. Now, What other relationships are important? Well, when helpers are doing a good job of building relationships with children and families who are having various kind of struggles, almost the better a job that they're doing at it, the more likely they are to experience difficult emotions, because you're coming alongside someone who's experiencing distress. The better you are at that, the more likely it is that you might experience frustration, anger, helplessness, hopelessness, or just kind of sadness. So as a worker, there's a kind of a risk as a helper that they get isolated and burned out. So what do helpers need in order to be able to keep doing the work well and not get isolated and burnt out? They need good colleagues. They need good relationships with team members who've kind of got their back and are going to pull them out of the hole. If any of you were looking at the BBC news this morning over your breakfast, there was a sad but great example of this, where we've got a GP describing burnout, saying they were left feeling like a husk of a human through the work. But I wanted to zoom in on a particular aspect that got this person out of that hole, which was that they realised they were suffering burnout when a colleague intervened. They didn't even realise that they were falling down a hole. A colleague noticed, and then they took some time off work and accessed some help. So just as the relationship between the helper and the person being helped is important, it's equally important that that helper has got some good relationships with their colleagues. And actually, hopefully it's not just one colleague. Hopefully you're part of a team that prioritises relationships and looks out for one another. Why am I using pictures of Lego? Your guess is as good as mine. I started down the track of using pictures of Lego, and then I had to sort of carry on. But it's no good if those relationships are just between team members, if it feels like kind of your senior managers aren't taking a relational approach. And so we hear about this, teams where they're saying, well, we're being told to work in a relational way, but we don't feel like we're being managed in a relational way by our managers, our senior managers, our commissioners. You kind of don't want a workforce of people who feel like they're just numbers and they're not kind of valued. So actually, it's not just team relationships. You kind of want that relational approach to be applied from the top to the bottom of the organisation, because you're a lot less able to apply a relational approach if you're not being you're not in a relational context in how you're doing your work. And then finally, you can see I'm sort of zooming out from the child outwards. When families or children have multiple needs, it's not uncommon that they need multiple helpers from multiple teams. And of course, that's what Family Hubs is all about. Where that's the case, helpers need good relationship with those other helpers from other teams and other organisations to avoid disintegrated, fragmented help. So it's kind of, well, hopefully none of your team around the family meetings look exactly like this, but it's not unusual that despite the fact each of us has really good intentions for the young person and family, it's not unusual that we can kind of disagree and fall out. People often say, oh, I love working with families. It's working with these other agencies that gets really, really difficult. So actually what helps there is having good relationships. So what we're saying is relationships matter between children and families, between families and the communities around them, between families and helpers, between those helpers and their team and their wider organisation and commissioners, and then between organisations. And although I've said between organisations, of course, organisations can't have human relationships. It's the individuals within those organisations that need to have good relationships with the individuals in the other relationships, in the other organisations. so I wanted to do some thinking about kind of what gets in the way, or a particularly important aspect of relationships, and that's the problem of trust and mistrust. So some children and families to whom we would like to offer help might have quite high levels of mistrust in us, or kind of ambivalence about whether they want help from us or can trust us. And it's really easy to kind of start to use terms like that they're hard to reach, difficult to engage, or just difficult, which are quite pejorative, kind of blaming terms, really. So of course we need to try and understand how that mistrust makes sense. So if you've experienced relational trauma, you've been harmed by others, if you've been kind of marginalized within society or within certain contexts, or excluded, or you or your family or community have experienced maybe chronic oppression, or you've had previous experiences of services that have felt unhelpful, punitive, blaming, actually it makes sense that you adapt to that world by mistrusting others. That's a sensible response to keep yourself safe. If people have been demonstrably harmful towards you, you don't just want to be trusting anybody that says they can help. So mistrust is an understandable, adaptive response to circumstances. It's our job to understand where that mistrust is coming from, and adapt what we do accordingly. And what's so sort of cruel about this kind of mistrust is it's the very thing that you're sort of needing help for, say the relational trauma, that gets in the way of you being able to receive the help from it. So it's our job to really kind of understand that. Similarly, if as a helper I don't have trust in the colleagues around me, I'm much less able to kind of take positive risks in my work, to kind of make myself vulnerable in the way that this work does make us vulnerable. If I kind of don't trust that my colleagues have got my rope, that they are going to make sure that I'm okay, it's harder for me to do my job when there's mistrust within organisations. Similarly, when I don't trust other services or people from other organisations, I don't really trust the assessment they did, so I repeat it and I get the young person or the family to tell me their story again, and another worker over here gets them to do it again. And we've heard from young people and families that that can be frustrating at best. At worst, it can be actually traumatic to be repeating your story and feeling endlessly you're having to tell more and more people, because the workers don't quite trust that the other services have done their assessment right. We might duplicate work and kind of overlap. I might, when another worker in the network sees things differently to me, if I haven't really got that trust there, I don't really understand them, I'm much less likely to be able to take on their different perspective to mine, and so we don't learn. And the learning thing is important. There's so much expertise amongst different organisations that we could be learning from, but when that kind of basic trust and relationships aren't there, I kind of can't, I'm not sure if I can take on their knowledge and their practice-based evidence. So we need trust at these different levels too. I want to introduce this idea. It's kind of a bit of jargon if you've not heard of it before, but it's epistemic trust, a particular type of trust, and it is, if you like, a mechanism for working out who other people I can trust to have something to say that would be helpful to me about life, kind of social learning. And the thing that kind of triggers this particular type of trust is the experience of feeling understood by the person. So for those that kind of know what mentalizing is, it's that experience of being mentalized, recognized as an individual by others. So if I kind of think that someone, oh, you're a bit of an expert in kind of parenting generally, but I don't feel that you've understood my particular parenting dilemma, I'm much less likely to trust you. So I need to kind of feel held in mind by the other in order to trust them. A way of thinking about this is thinking about kind of the door to help being closed. So we've got a client, maybe a parent here, and a worker here who's got a great evidence-based intervention. They're really, really skilled at it, and they offer that help. But when they do, it doesn't reach the client because they don't trust the worker. So the door to help is closed. Doesn't matter how good that help is, it's not going to be helpful because this parent is thinking, I don't know if I can trust you. What triggers that door to open is when the worker starts to really understand what it's like to be this particular parent with this particular dilemma. When they're able to demonstrate, either through talking or through their behaviour, that they've got that more or less accurate understanding of the person, when the parent can see that, that's when the kind of the door to help opens, and that helping intervention can be experienced as useful, and change can happen. So that this is the key point, that it's feeling understood and recognised that opens that door. And of course, that's not just the case between the people that we're trying to help and workers. As Peter was saying just now, we need that trust also at multiple levels. Of course, we need trust within families so that children are learning and developing from the adults and older children around them. We need that trust within communities. We need that trust between families and helpers. We also need that trust so that learning and information can flow between helpers and their colleagues within their organisation, and then more broadly between organisations too. We're able to offer better help if we're able to trust one another too. So I'm just coming towards the end of my time here. I just want to introduce Ambit because it says on the programme that that's the team I'm from, but I'll just do it really briefly. It's one approach to supporting relationships and trust at these multiple levels. So it stands for Adaptive Mentalisation Based Integrative Treatment. There's going to be a link going in the chat in a moment if you wanted to read more about it. It's putting these ideas of mentalising and epistemic trust at the core and reminding us to apply those theories, not just with the work with the client, whether that's a child, a young person, parent, carers, others, but that we're also applying those core theories and skills to how we work with the wider network, how we work with our team, and how we're able to do continual learning from our practice, from children, young people and families, and from others within the network. So I'll leave it there, but you can look through and go and read more about Ambit if you wish to, and there's ways that you can contact us on those web pages that you're going to be sent as well if you wish.
Liz, thank you so much for that presentation. It was really interesting, and I think that it really helped. It helped me actually, and hopefully for the audience as well, to really think about trust a little bit more in a more of a nuanced way, and destigmatize the idea that a lack of trust isn't a sort of bad thing or something that's wrong with someone, but actually an adaptive response to a variety of factors. And at the same time, you really emphasized how important it is to also see an individual whilst kind of maintaining a view of what the system looks like as well. So thank you very much. And I'm now very excited to move on to our next presentation from Gateshead. So we have Sarah Gorman, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Edbert's House. And we have Gavin Bradshaw, who manages the Early Help Service in Gateshead Council and oversees embedding family hubs, Start for Life, and other programmes such as reducing parental conflict. So just a reminder that it'd be great if you can put some questions into the chat if you have any, and we'll make sure that we make time at the end to respond to some of those questions. So have a think about what might be useful to know more about, to apply to your particular family hub context, and we can facilitate a discussion around that at the end. Okay, over to you, Sarah and Gavin.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here and thank you for the introduction, Claudia. I find myself nodding through the early inputs there from both Liz and Peter in terms of setting the context. If I just enable my video. So what I would like to do today really is to take you through the ways in which we are embedding our relational approach out in localities, and there'll be an input from Sarah very, very shortly. And what I also want to really qualify from the outset as well is that we're not holding ourselves up as maybe a unique area or an exemplar for this area of practice. As Peter alluded to earlier, this is very much part of a movement towards relational work right across sectors. But before I proceed with my presentation, I would like to just play a very short video clip, including a user of our family hubs and one of the services who uses our centre. So if I could just ask for that video clip to be played, please. Thank you.
My name's Danny. I've been coming here for about 19 months now. Rhett, my little boy, he's 19 months old now. Bit of a bad time when he was born, unfortunately. I was diagnosed with cancer while pregnant, so the community midwives within this family hub have been absolutely amazing, as well as the health visitors, as well as everybody who I've came across. They've been very supportive and asking how I'm doing it. Just, it's the support that you need without realising that you need that kind of support. And as a result, we're still here. But everybody's been great. Even the Andy's Man Club, that's been really great for my husband as well, because we've had to deal with quite a lot in a short space of time. So he comes every Monday, and he was here last night, and he just finds it really good to speak to other people about what's going on and that, because speaking to other people outside the family does help.
We see a lot of men coming along who are not comfortable talking to family and friends. They don't want to burden their family and friends, but by coming to Andy's Man Club, opening up, hopefully realising that it's not as difficult as they thought it was going to be, a lot of men can then go out and have those difficult conversations with their family, with their friends, and that's something I was able to do as a result of my attendance at Andy's Man Club. The benefit of having a place like a family hub is you already have some great resources with it in place. So if a man comes into Andy's Man Club who's struggling with a certain specific thing, that family hub might have the answer to that person. You can straight away say to them, look, I've got a connection in this building who can give you the answer you need.
So this is a nice safe play space outside for families to play in. It's a space that's available to them all day, you know, when the weather permits, as part of any other session that they're attending.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for playing the clip. We can just sort of roll on to our profile of Gateshead. So we are indeed Tyneside's left bank. We have a border with a number of other local authorities, and we have a large amount of poverty within our area, including some really chronically high levels within particular wards across the area. Quite surprisingly for people who maybe don't know our area or our region, Gateshead has a really large rural area within the west of the borough, and that again is very influential in terms of how we deploy services out into that particular area. But we do have over 900 registered charities, 2,000 grassroots organisations, and really the assets that we're going to talk about today in this presentation, we have really strong, proud links, networks, communities right across our borough. Next slide, please. Lots of people on this call from an early help background will have a very, very similar understanding about what the emergency policy agenda is around delivering help within localities. Our early help strategy was approved in April this year. We renewed our strategy with very much a focus on delivering the right help at the right time. But we were really keen to stress the importance of family relationships and stability within that strategy. Now, not least because there are a whole series of policy drivers around at the moment, which are just beginning to intersect really and to inform the thinking around locality work. And certainly the care review and the recommendations around family help are absolutely up there. The supporting families agenda and the early help system guide, that self-assessment tool, which many on the call will be familiar with. And of course, the Fuller report also talking about integrated neighbourhood teams. There is a momentum in national policy terms around thinking how family help, effective family help, is delivered out in localities, but without it looking as if local authorities are the sole or a monopolised provider of that help. Far from it. Next slide, please. So in putting together the presentation today, Sarah and myself were thinking very carefully about what this means, and we talked about how we frame this form of family support. So we could talk about building on family strengths and holistic support. We've heard already a little bit about trust and about developing peer networks and building on assets within the family, and about trying to maintain consistent relationships across the helping sectors. But what does it really look like? And I think really the main sort of insight from the presentation that we have this morning is that structure and processes are important, but values and culture are equally important. And we are really kind of keyed into this question around, yes, there is that science around what makes families engage with help or not. But we really wanted to engage with that question about what would make families run towards help, actively embrace help in all of its forms. Next slide, please. So we have a practice model, we have a formal practice model, and I'm going to give a nod here to North Yorkshire because with their kind permission, our practice model is based in part on the North Yorkshire model. It spans the early help service and children's services, and you will see both in this slide and the next one, next slide please, that there is talk there of safety and of risk and of intervention, but equally important, it is to include words such as respect and relationships and compassion and care. And we're very, very proud that that is our formal practice model spanning our local authority services. Next slide, please. So probably the most overused slide in the history of any presentation on locality work, and is the blockbuster style graphic, which is used by the support and families team, with the family at the centre, and quite rightly placing community and family and friends and place and environment around the family. And I think really informing our thinking on this is for local authority services to show just a little bit of humility about where we are within that family network. The absolutely fabulous Becca Dove at Camden talks about that, those warps and wefts, about how a fabric of interwoven formal and non-formal forms of early help do create that early help system, and we absolutely believe in that philosophy. Next slide, please. We have 7 family hubs currently across our area, including in the west of our area. We have repurposed in the main our children's centre estate, but this map in no way represents the absolute complex, thorough, intricate network of interweaving of those hubs with a whole range of providers from the community sector, from the faith sector, from uniform services, sports clubs and schools, where we also offer a whole range of co-located services alongside those education professionals. Next slide, please. So our formal relational offer, our evidence-based programmes and interventions, We invested really heavily in the workforce, the training, the offer around the evidence-based provision that we have. It's very strong, we feel. It's evaluated. We know that it has an impact with the families that we work with. Our Healthy Relationships pathway includes our evidence-based parenting programs. Many on this call will be offering a reducing parental conflict offer. Ours does include a therapy pathway, online provision, as well as group support. We've invested quite a lot in family group conferences, and our family network pilot has added further investment into that. And very recently, we introduced a trauma-informed trusting hands service to work with adolescents on the edge of care who have multiple needs, and there's a therapeutic element to that service offer through trusting hands. So very much a formal relational offer, but we wanted to think much wider than that for the purposes of this morning's presentation. Next slide, please. So really, we really wanted to pose this question around the repurposing of the offer in terms of the family hub agenda. And there is a slight paradox in the offer in terms of Start for Life, in that we absolutely are committed to delivering the Start for Life offer. But the funding is very much for the earlier life course, and we're interested in developing a genuinely relational, whole family offer across the whole age range. And we wanted to pose this question really to take the famous quote that lots of you will be aware of. If you build it, they will come. But what if they don't? What if people don't press the mini-com? What if they don't walk over the threshold and sign in? What if some of those transactional approaches, which might have characterised previous service provision, will act as a deterrent for that engagement from those families? So what we do know is that we wanted to develop an approach which was genuinely relational and harnessed the social value of our voluntary sector partners. And that's the approach that we want to talk about a little bit more this morning. Next slide, please. So at this stage, I want to introduce Sarah, who's the CEO of Edbert's House, who works very closely alongside us in terms of family hubs within our area. I'm going to pass on to Sarah now, who will talk you through some of her work.
Thanks so much, Gavin, and thanks for setting the scene. So Gavin and I have been working closely together on the Family Hubs agenda, which has been a real privilege. And as he said, what if people don't come? Or what if actually we do get a bunch of emotionally regulated professional parents who want to engage with all of our excellent evidence-based programs? But what if actually we struggle to build relationships in areas where there is high antisocial behaviour and lots of families with very complex issues, where really we might say as professionals that we recognise there are certain areas where actually we really feel that the families there need additional support. Poverty means that they've got limited opportunities. Maybe our existing Sure Start estate isn't really in the areas where actually we want to engage. So how can we start to proactively engage and build relationships in those areas? And this is where the history of the 13-year history of Edbert's and some of our learning comes in, which we have brought to bear in our Family Hub agenda. And I want to show you a short video that is narrated by one of our local mums, who tells us a little bit of the story, an insight into the work of Edbert's, and then I want to go on to explain how we've incorporated some of that learning into our Family Hub agenda. Thanks.
Welcome to our estate, a happy, thriving community, but it hasn't always been like this. Not so long ago, there was very high antisocial behaviour in our area. Lots of residents were involved in some kind of disturbance, and the police were always around trying to sort things out. People didn't want to move here, and some houses stood empty for years. We wanted things to change, but we weren't sure how to make it happen. A charity started working on our estate and listening to our worries and concerns, and our dreams. That was the start of Edbert's House, right in the middle of our estate. We thought about some of the problems we faced in our community. We recruited a community development worker at Edbert's. We did the interview and chose who we wanted. And we started to meet at our own community centre to talk about what we could do to help each other and the wider community. Soon we had quite a few things going on, including women's, children's and lunch groups, even our own pantomime. I stepped up to be a volunteer and I noticed other people's confidence had grown too. Some of us started thinking about going back to work, so Edbat's House started accredited courses to help people get the job they wanted. At one point, we had the borough's largest maths group. Within a few short years, antisocial behaviour on our estate had fallen and there was no empty houses. In fact, there was a waiting list to move in. Being at Edbat is now like being part of a big family. It has helped bring younger and older people together, changing our whole estate for the better. People heard how our community projects were helping improve our well-being, so people from wider communities began to join in as well. Now we have houses and workers across the whole of Gateshead, building happier, healthier, friendlier communities. Visit our website to find out more.
Thanks. Next slide, please. It gives you just a little whistle-stop tour into what we've been doing over the last 30 years. And as you can see from the end of that video, we now have 4 houses across the borough. And all our work is built on the evidence and principles of Michael Marmot's work, this whole idea of building a sense of control and agency. And we know that that sense of control and agency comes from really having effective relationships and connections in your life. In our area, lots of the community infrastructure had actually been taken away. So where there had been shipbuilding and mining and social clubs and faith groups, lots of these had dissipated over the years, leaving people fragmented and not connected in their communities, leaving them without steady relationships, without mentors who potentially they could turn to in their communities. And those connections are so vital to us, because actually if someone says to you, who are you? Then the only way you can define yourself often is by the connections that you have with others. So maybe I am a mother, I am a wife, I am a partner, I am a worker. Some of the folks we were meeting were saying actually those relationships had fragmented in their life. Actually, my partner has left me, my children have been removed, I have never had a job. Actually difficult to define even who you are. And actually as we restore those connections, we start to build control, which means that people can start to really take control and affect the things that matter to them. Next slide, please. So our ethos is very much around doing with and not to. Lots of the people we work with in the estates where we work, they've had a lot of stuff done to them. Maybe they rent their properties, they've got very little control over what goes on. So actually restoring that is a very powerful thing. And the voluntary sector is often in a unique position to do that, a unique position to build those relationships because of the equal power balance that we have. So actually when we go onto an estate initially with our engagement team, we don't know anything about people. We don't know whether they've paid their rent. We don't know anything about how they're raising their children. We have no information at all. We basically have no agenda. We just go on to chat to people, to listen. Lots of cups of tea, and lots of cake, preferably, and decent biscuits, and really getting alongside people to really try to understand and to hear what is happening for them, and focusing on proactively going door to door to build relationships with people. And again, the outcomes of that we don't know, but actually just to be listening and to build friendships and connections. We deliberately appoint a temporary fixed-term engagement team because we want the community themselves to get involved in recruiting the person who is going to work there. So our community development workers are recruited by the community. We form a community steering group, those who are interested in really making a difference in their area. And again, that sense of connection, that sense of ownership. I'm actually part of the steering group of a project that is going to change the direction of our estate, really starts to build a platform of agency and change within that area. So our community steering group lead, as I say, on the recruitment, on induction, on planning events and activities that go on in our houses, and also in budget setting, so taking control of the activities budget and deciding how that's spent. And our work is long term. So some of the teenagers that I now know on the estate when we first started were in their buggies and getting pushed around by their mums in the beginning. And that kind of long-term relationship building is really powerful. Next slide, please. Someone once said this about Edwards, and I love this quote, that it's like my house, but without the stress. The actual building and environment in which we build relationships is really important. We need to focus on that. Professionals often forget the fear of coming to meet new people, because we meet new people every day, don't we? We meet a new person, we go to a meeting. You know, today I'm talking into a void of 110 people I'm seeing who are participating who I don't know, and I was mildly terrified actually about that. But generally speaking, we meet new people, and we don't think too much of it. Some people said to me when they first came into Edwards that they were so terrified. Now, we have a small house in the middle of the estate. It's not big, but actually they were so terrified that they were physically sick in the toilet before they came. Now, we have to kind of bear this in mind, that when we build these very grand centres where we expect people to come to what we're doing, it potentially is utterly terrifying for people. And how we create spaces that are comfortable. We have an embedded team, so that actually when you knock, it's a bit like your house. That's why we call them houses. When people knock on the door, they know who's going to answer the door. There is a real comfort in that. And when we're working with people who are struggling with trauma, potentially with attachment issues, from adverse childhood experiences, and they don't have trust, then actually this is very, very important. And how the house looks as well. So there's sofas, there's a domestic style kitchen, it's cozy, it's relaxed. We have no reception desk. People can come in and just sit and have a cup of coffee. They can just sit and be. There doesn't have to be any session going on. Space where you can come and hang out and talk and chat is absolutely vital. Next slide, please. This is another quote as well that I like about Edwards, is something that you feel. Relational work, if we're going to build relationships with people, that is emergent. It's emergent. It's emergent. We don't know actually what the outcomes are going to be. A bit like when we get into a friendship just in our normal life with our friendship or with our family. We don't really think about what our family outcomes are going to be, but we do think about what our family values are. And this is where our values are really very important. When we build relationships, we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We don't know what the needs are going to be. So as Peter said at the beginning, we need to be very flexible and responsive. We need to be constantly learning and readapting what we want to do. We might try doing a course for 4 months and actually nobody comes to it. So let's not carry on doing that. Let's go back to people and say, what actually do you need? Where are you at? What would be useful to you? What we can control is the values with which we deliver our relationships, the values with which we deliver our work. And that's a really powerful thing. So we have a very clear set of values at Edwards, which include love and kindness and bravery. And we want to deliver everything that we do with that in mind, particularly as around a strengths-based approach. But that we worked on that particularly with our families. So for instance, there's often a lot of parenting courses offered. Now, parenting courses can be fantastic, many of them evidence-based, but almost have an underlying assumption that actually you're not a very good parent, and therefore you need to go on a parenting course to become better, which requires you to accept the fact that maybe you're not doing that well at the beginning, which again can be quite difficult for some folks. Actually, at Edwards, we started to run level 1, level 2 courses, which were accredited qualifications in child development and also in counselling. Very interesting that lots of the folk who came along to those were not probably in a position at that time to work in a nursery or potentially to become a counsellor. But the information that it covered and all of the topics that it addressed really helped them to start to understand their child development and to be able to parent more effectively. And similarly, help them to understand themselves through the counselling course. Plus, at the end of the day, they had an accredited qualification to write on their CV, and actually could very proudly go around and tell folks that they were doing level 1 and level 2 in childcare. Now that again starts to build people's efficacy, starts to build their own sense of agency and purpose, and using those relationships in a powerful way. And in that way, I always think it's a challenge to think about, what are we actually measuring? What are we measuring when we're delivering our work? Is it just numbers? Is it just numbers of people who are attending things? Or actually, is it the efficacy and the control? and the way that we are able to build relationships with people that start to become the measure of the effectiveness and success of our work. Next slide, please. So we saw through the work on our first estate some really great outcomes. We were working in the estate with the highest antisocial behaviour in the borough initially. You can see that in 2010. And by 2016, that had fallen to below average, 0.7 out of 100 tenants, as this poor chap without a head, or woman, I'm sure. So really I saw fantastic outcomes from that. Next slide, please. And also in the fact that we had many houses empty on our estate, and actually then they were all full, and now there is a waiting list to move in. Move on, please. And we discovered our role in being brokers. So as we started to build trust with people who often were not able to trust, and particularly mistrustful of statutory agencies, so particularly mistrustful, unfortunately, of social workers and often of early help and other services who were connected with the council, then we were able to be brokers to bring in others alongside the people where we had become the kind of trust agents, if you like. So we started to work with others to broker those relationships. Next slide, please. And in doing that, we found how complicated as systems are for people to navigate. This is one family. This is a representation of one family that we worked with, or we analysed, that in 1 year they had 63 different professionals working with them. Incredibly difficult to navigate that kind of system. And we started to think there must be a better way of doing this stuff. Next slide, please. And we started to recognise that actually to have a thriving community, we started to work on this in about 2017, we needed all of these kind of relationships to work well together. So in a thriving community, intervention, an interventional relationship is really important. So actually some people's children do need to be removed, some people do need to be arrested, enforcement has to happen, it's absolutely vital. We also need transactional services. So we do need people who can come and help you if you haven't paid your rent. We need people who actually have expertise and specialism in different areas of the wider determinants of people's health. It's absolutely important. What's often missing, and particularly in our most challenging communities, is actually those relationships, that power, equal power balance of relationships. And so actually how we start to work across that rainbow to work together and knitting in. So actually, particularly in our most challenging areas, the voluntary sector, doing that equal power balance relationship building trust, drawing in then transactional services or others who can work around it, and potentially also interventional services. We've seen also then how we've had increased call outs from the police, because actually people now are more interested in speaking to the police and to social workers and to others. So how we start to build those relationships is really key. Next slide, please. And what we wanted to create in Gateshead across our areas is what we call our department store experience. And so at the moment, services are often a little bit like a high street on the left there. So they each operate in their own little silo, and we've already heard about this, how actually there can sometimes be a lack of trust between services, resulting in duplication, in endless retelling of your story, which can be very traumatizing for people. And often sometimes even those services are almost in competition with each other, particularly the voluntary sector can be particularly bad in that regard, that actually there can be a sense of preciousness and competition about the work that is going on. And it really doesn't help the people who are struggling and needing help. We want to create a department store, and we guessed if we were going to do that, we want to go for Harrods, we might as well go for the best. And in a department store, that sense of everyone having still their own uniqueness of service, but actually all working together under one sense of common vision. And in the same way that if you might go into the department store to buy a teapot, but actually you might come out with a birthday card and a duvet, because stuff is put on the end of the arse. It's easy to get, it's easy to find. It's easy that one person can point you to another part of the store very quickly. And that's what we wanted and for our communities to be able to access the support that they needed. Next slide, please. So we started experimenting with this in 2019 in a place-based project in the heart of the estate that now had, it's called Beacon Lock East Estate, which now had the highest levels of antisocial behaviour. And working with Gavin and other players across the council, including primary care, including the police, including other voluntary sector organisations, we pulled together a multi-agency team who will be embedded in the heart of that estate. We have our own early help worker and our own social worker who local people were involved in recruiting in the same way as I discussed earlier. Really helps with the engagement of those people, really helps with the community accepting them as part of a multi-agency help offer. And they became embedded with our community development worker and our youth workers. And now, actually on a weekly basis, then individual stories are discussed. And now we can start to pull from a toolbox of interventions and toolbox of relationships, what will be most effective for that family at that time. So if we've got an issue with Johnny on a Friday night, is it better for the police to knock on the door? Is it better for the social worker to knock on the door? Is it better for the youth worker to knock on the door? What proactive and diversionary activities can we involve Johnny in to help him and to give him better opportunities? A much richer and more effective setup, but with that local residents steering group at the heart of what we're doing. Next slide, please. So does it work? We've seen this year, and this is our community development worker, one of our youth workers is inside that rabbit. So that's the bit of the job description of anything else that might be required. But we have seen a sea change in the attitude to the early help worker and the social worker, which has been fantastic. Local people saying themselves, oh, you need to get the early help worker to help you, to come to a meeting, it will change the outcome. You know, the social worker is only here to help us, actually, but a very, very significant difference where actually in the past there had been very high levels of mistrust with that service. There's an opportunity to share local information and to do community mapping of families and issues. We've seen a drop in antisocial behaviour. We've seen an increase in police reporting. We've seen £250,000 released into residents' pockets through the work of Citizens Advice, which again is really impactful in terms of poverty, which is one of the drivers of issues in our communities. Over 50 people are currently involved in counselling, which they probably would not have considered before, and an anecdotal decrease in GP appointments. So we're very excited about where this is heading. Next slide, please. And our vision is to have family houses across the borough that will work hand in hand with the family hubs, where the more formal offer that Gavin's already talked about is represented, and feeding into those, and potentially some of those more formal offers being able to be delivered out of the houses to right on the doorsteps of people who need it. I'm going to hand back to Gavin.
Thank you, Sarah. So just as we bring our session to a close, I just want to conclude with a number of slides around our insights and learning. You heard me talk a little bit before about how proud we were locally of our Children's Centre Sure Start offer. We think that we had a lot of evidence, data, which showed that we did reach into those communities of highest need. Could we have done more? Could we have done it better? Could we have used the voluntary sector as a conduit for some of those relationships and been a little bit more creative about our approach? Yes, absolutely. That is absolutely the case. And that's what we feel now with family hubs in terms of diversifying that offer, in terms of a food offer, a clothing offer, and putting on more of an all-age menu of options, but absolutely building on the best of Sure Start, but using family hubs as an opportunity to really improve that reach going forward. One of the other insights is that there is a big co-location agenda as part of family hubs, co-location of maternity services, other health professionals, voluntary sector partners, sports clubs and others. And that's a really great thing. But co-location is not the same as collaboration, going back to Sarah's department store example. So co-location is important, but it's not the same as good relationships. And, again, anecdotally, from visiting areas from outside of our region, nationally, I have heard lots of stories of we have service X or Y co-located here now, but their door never opens. We never have a conversation. So co-location, not an end in itself. Relationships, more important. Culture and values, we've already talked about as being really important. And we really wanted to take a 360-degree view of that. So whether that be our reception staff, our cleaning staff, our frontline staff, anybody who's using the building, right the way down. If you look at the YouTube clip that we used earlier, if you look at the fullness of that clip, there is a YouTube link towards the end of the slides. You will see the role that our cafe plays within those relational approaches. So we really wanted to take a very holistic view of people being involved in that. And if you can just go to the next slide, please, before I attached this quite late to the presentation. So this came to me 2 weeks ago. It was a note sent in from a parent who, just in a couple of sentences, talks about her experience of dealing with reception staff. So let's just think about, yes, well, how do we improve our reception staff? Are we talking here about this in a very one-dimensional way? Let's put people through an NVQ in customer service and put them on various kind of call handling or specific training to that role? Or do we see our reception staff as people who should be confident and comfortable listening and having supportive conversations with people who come in? I would highlight here that there would be absolutely no way that we would want people to be stepping over certain boundaries, and that advice would have to always be safe. And obviously our staff have safeguarding training, so we would always be very mindful of our boundaries and our processes around that. But it's just a lovely example of warmth and kindness. And I think that's really, really important to read that about a receptionist who was able to develop a knowledge of a family over a long period of time, and the child and the mum really identified with that receptionist. Just go back to the previous slide deck, please. So we're very, very keen as well to expand our range of peer support and informal network options. So through Family Hub funding, we are developing our peer support offer around infant feeding and perinatal mental health. But very often, it's the ultra-informal forms of peer support which are really important. A really good example of that is our ADHD parenting programme. Really good syllabus, lots of good outcomes from that. But are those outcomes as effective as the fact that the parents, when leaving the programme, go into their own WhatsApp group, or the parents meeting Witherspoons every Wednesday night to tell each other that they're doing fine? Struggle to elevate the importance of the syllabus above that peer support network, which is endured after completion of those programs. We are absolutely trying to look at how mother-centric some of our offer and practice is. It's absolutely vital that we have female-only spaces in terms of breastfeeding support and other aspects of the offer, of course. But we are putting on more and more for fathers and co-parents as part of that diverse offer. And finally, in terms of integrated delivery, family hubs have absolutely acted as a catalyst for family hub staff co-facilitating programs, groups, coming into arrangements where we are using pop-up sites, venues, and a whole range of locality settings to deliver aspects of the family hub offer. Minutes before I was joining the call this morning, we're delivering sessions out to Salvation Army venues, food banks and so on. So it's not just about this being about buildings and centres, it's been as creative as possible of delivering out of and around centres right across our localities, often alongside people from a whole range of agencies. Next slide, please. And then one after. So just in closing, really, We're very keen to talk about hubs and houses. That's our model. We honestly believe that family hubs won't be effective or thrive unless they are embedded within a locality-based system of help. And we're very, very keen to sort of replicate the Edbert's House concept of houses. We don't like the idea of spokes. Spoke seems to imply connecting a hub to an outer edge. These organisations are not the outer edge. They're very much within the heart of our communities. And I think to refer to them as houses really to sort of like speak to that language of like care and warmth. I have mentioned there about family hubs being effective as part of a network, and the VCS providers providing sites for us to deliver our offer from. What I will very quickly allude to, though, is that we have Latbriate there. You see the logo in the bottom left-hand corner. Gateshead has a very large Orthodox Jewish community within the central area, and we are working very, very closely with the Health and Wellbeing Centre from that community to provide maternity and health visiting appointments at around the community infrastructure around the Jewish community within our area. So we're really excited about some of the work that we're providing to that community in a culturally appropriate environment for families to access that. And you saw on the video earlier as well that Andy's Man Club, which meets nationally on a Monday evening, has absolutely thrived as part of our family hub offer, so much so that they're moving to 2-3 groups in terms of the actual size of the provision which is available. The good thing with Andy's Man Club as well as a national mental health charity for men is that very often the participants of that group then go on to become facilitators of other groups. So excellent examples of working shoulder to shoulder with our local voluntary sector organisations. Next slide, please. So we're just in closing, just a few more insights into the things which really kind of fuel and oil this sort of change process, if you like. Very often this is about mature partnerships. These are not things which are just turned on like a light switch. It has taken time to develop a number of these partnerships, and it's absolutely worth having almost that strategic patience around some of those relationships. The governance of the system is absolutely crucial. Many of you on this call will have early help boards or early help system and prevention boards. Gateshead's recently reviewed the governance arrangements around the early help system, and we've been very, very careful to look at the terms of reference and to insert expectations around these relational approaches into those terms of reference. It's a great opportunity to refresh a relational approach in terms of the governance arrangements. Co-production is absolutely vital, as Sarah has alluded to. Our embedded early help worker within the Beacon Lough area, that job profile was developed in conjunction with the community, and the community attended the interview process, participated in that process to recruit the worker, a genuine example of co-production. And as a result, we think we've seen a real improvement in terms of the relationships with the early help worker co-located there. And certainly parent carer panels going forward do provide an opportunity to be able to take that co-production onto a much higher level. One of the things, it's perhaps even beyond obvious to say this, but we are going to say it, because I think when you get staff absences or you get issues around workforce, and certainly in terms of demands on workforce, it's not always possible to do this. But it's really important to designate known people into localities and into particular settings to try to minimise rotation and transience of staff. Sarah mentioned earlier about the houses model, that when you knock on the door, you know who's going to answer the door. And certainly, right across this, if we were having a discussion about street-based detached youth work, people would talk about the importance of repeated opportunities to build relationships over time. So we really do try and minimise the rotation of staff and have identified people for areas. And I've already touched on this, so I won't go into much more info on this, but having a very dynamic approach to using space and facilities right across the board in terms of the voluntary sector estate, schools, early years settings, delivering the offer in a very agile pop-up way through our green spaces and so on. And we will absolutely continue to do that. Next slide, please. So that really brings our input into a close. Hopefully we've tried to demonstrate how we have tried to nurture a relational approach through not just a relationship with the voluntary community sector, but embedding that within locality settings. So we would really welcome any comments or questions either now or in the chat in terms of other people's experiences of developing locality work along similar lines. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gavin and Sarah. We've had lots of questions and comments in the Q&A box, so I'll read some out. But it's been really insightful to hear how thoughtful your approach is from the different roles that you have in the community and peer sphere, and also the language, how much consideration you put into language. So, for example, how you are using language like spokes and houses and what that might mean to people. And I particularly liked the phrase trust agents. I hadn't heard that before. So, Gavin, you also didn't need to worry about your blockbuster graphic because someone specifically said that they really enjoyed that and it's a great visual representation. But I wanted to go back to something you touched on at the beginning, actually. We had a question about reducing parental conflict. And I wondered what your advice was to people who might be kind of struggling to integrate all these different policy and practice programs together, and how you can use relational practice to facilitate that rather than it being an additional thing to do.
Yeah, so Gated was part of a national program around reducing parental conflict. And we received funding from DWP to develop a regional model around the funding of evidence-based pathways around RPC work. Now, since then, and other areas on the call will be familiar with this, there has been such a thing as the RPC Local Grant, which is a grant given to local authorities and partners to develop an RPC offer. Within Gateshead, our group offer, our direct frontline offer, is delivered at family hub locations. But alongside that, we have a digital offer, which we commission from a national provider, and that is linked to our online Start for Life offer. And we've also used our RPC grant to commission a provider to provide relationship counselling as a therapeutic pathway. So we have a coordinator, a healthy relationships pathway coordinator, which includes our parenting offer, and our RPC offer sits alongside that, but is delivered out face-to-face in locality settings through our family hubs.
That's great. Thanks, Gavin. And Sarah, we've had lots of questions about your organisation. People are wondering about how we can spread such an excellent model to other areas, and we've also had some questions about how it's funded. So I think people just really want to hear a bit more about it. And I know we've just got a couple of minutes left, so for any other questions, we'll kind of respond to this in the comms post-event.
Sure, I mean, I can say a few words about that. We began in 2010 and we are funded by, like so many other smaller voluntary organisations, by a sort of patchwork of funding. We have a number of services, so not just our houses. So we also run a social prescribing service across Gateshead with primary care. So we have some philanthropic funding. We have now our primary care funding, and then we have also now been funded through the family hubs. So we took some of the family hubs. Well, we didn't take it. That's awful, doesn't it? We stole it. No, so Gavin and our steering group obviously decided then that we wanted to create an overarching model, and so therefore some of the funding was used to actually fund our community development workers. So we are a registered charity and a company limited by guarantee, and we have just kind of slowly grown really over the years. I'd love to talk to other people who want to start an Edwards style organisation, and we are supporting at the moment a project down in Newton Aycliffe that is just starting and wanting to develop on the same principles. So I would encourage folk to get in touch if they're keen to do that, because in many ways it's very simple. You just need really good staff.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think, yeah, you've really touched on how that relationship between statutory and community organisations can come together and have an impact when there is that collaboration. So we've come to the end of this session, and luckily some of the questions that have been asked I think will be responded to a bit later. For example, someone's asked about working with schools, so we'll be able to hear about that a bit later on in the next keynotes session. And someone's also asked about parent and carer panels, and we'll also be touching on that, so in a Leicester context. For everything else, we'll kind of respond to questions and send out a newsletter or something following this conference. But thank you so much to all our speakers this morning. We'll have a break now until 12. And if you are joining one of our workshop sessions at 12, we hope you are, these will be going ahead in a Zoom meeting format. So if you don't have the Zoom link to this, there should be links going out now in the chat, and also some instructions on the screen. So hopefully see some of you at 12, and then we'll have our afternoon session starting again following that later on. Thank you again to our speakers, and it's been a really enjoyable morning so far.